burning desire, when a billionaire's love turns to fire and passion becomes unstoppable? Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever met someone who made you feel so much love, anger, longing, all at once? She slapped him once, then again, hard and breathless, her fury trembling through her fingertips. But he only smirked, stepped in and kissed her. Twice, like it was the last thing he'd ever do. But how did they get there? Let me take you back to a rooftop in Boston. Claire Bennett didn't believe in fate. She believed in light, shadow, timing, and truth. But that morning on a rooftop in Boston, fate decided to interrupt her view. She was standing on the rooftop of a high-rise building in downtown Boston, camera in hand, eyes locked on the skyline as sunlight slipped between the glass towers. She had been sneaking up there for nearly a week every early morning, hoping to capture the final shot for her upcoming photography exhibit, a moment where the light kissed the city's forgotten corners like magic. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her. A deep, calm voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me, this is private property. You're not allowed to be here." Claire turned. Standing before her was a tall man in a sharp suit, posture crisp, eyes both distant and piercing. No introduction was needed. She knew who he was. Julian Westbrook, the man who owned this building and dozens more like it across the city. Claire didn't back down. She pointed to the small sign that read, "Open to public until 9 a.m., and said, "I've still got 20 minutes. I'm not breaking any rules." Julian studied her, then stepped closer. They stood face to face, in the stillness of the waking city, where the morning light draped over rooftops like silk. Neither of them knew it then, but that moment would mark the beginning of a story that would change them both, forever. Julian returned to the rooftop the next morning. Claire was surprised to see him holding 2 cups of coffee. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a rolled-up button-down and dark jeans, still refined but somehow more human. He extended a cup toward her. "I guessed you take it black, sugar's on the side, just in case." Claire accepted the cup, half surprised, half cautious. "I didn't think you'd come back." "Your lens showed me a version of this city I've never seen," Julian replied. From then on, they began meeting each morning. No plans, no texts, just the shared ritual of sunrise, sometimes in silence, sometimes in short, meaningful conversations. Julian asked about her camera, why she chose photography. Claire told him it was her way of capturing truth, not glossed over, not staged, just life as it is. One morning, sitting on the cold concrete floor, Claire asked, "So what do you do when you're not kicking people off rooftops?" Julian chuckled, a real, unguarded smile, the first she'd seen. "I started a software company, now I run a few others, still not sure what I'm actually good at." His honesty surprised her. For a man who seemed to have everything, Julian still questioned himself. That vulnerability pulled her in. A week later, he invited her to visit his mother's garden, a place he hadn't shared with anyone since she passed. Claire agreed, not out of curiosity, but because something inside her had begun to shift. This man, who once seemed like just a headline, was starting to feel real. Claire and Julian's feelings for each other grew faster than either had expected. What started as quiet mornings turned into late-night texts and conversations that neither wanted to end. But the real world wasn't as gentle as a rooftop at sunrise. Claire entered Julian's world for the first time at a charity gala hosted by his company. She wore an emerald green vintage dress borrowed from a friend and handmade silver earrings. The moment she stepped into the grand ballroom, eyes turned, less admiration, more assessment. The women who had stood beside Julian at previous events all belonged to a different world. Claire knew she didn't fit in, and they made sure she felt it. An older woman with a tight smile approached. "You're the photographer, right? What kind of work do you do? Weddings?" Claire smiled politely. "I capture everyday moments, hidden corners of the city that people usually miss." "Oh, street art." The woman nodded as if bestowing some shallow stamp of approval. Julian was busy talking to investors, missing the way Claire's expression steadily chilled. A week later, Julian attended a backyard gathering in Claire's neighborhood. Friends grilled food, played music, and tossed around trivia games. He showed up in a dark polo shirt, clearly out of place but trying. Claire's friends, mostly artists and working-class neighbors, looked at him with a mix of humor and wariness. "So this is the penthouse prince you mentioned," one friend whispered. Claire felt torn. So did Julian. But instead of addressing the discomfort, they both let it slide, until Julian posted a photo of them together on Instagram, captioned, "Sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places." Claire saw the post from friends before Julian even told her. Private moments, glances, laughter, their first kiss, suddenly became public narrative broadcast to his thousands of followers. That night, she showed up at his office. No yelling, no slammed doors, just an expression cold as December. "Did you ever think I might not want the world to learn about me through your version of the story?" Julian looked stunned. "I just wanted to protect us, to make us official." "Making it official doesn't mean speaking for me. You didn't ask. You didn't check. You turned me into a narrative to prove what? That you can love outside your world? You're not the hero in my story, Julian." The silence that followed was long and heavy. The truth was, he didn't get it, not because he didn't care, but because he'd never had to think about asking permission to share someone else's story. But this time, he had crossed a line. Claire walked away. He didn't stop her, and she didn't look back. Claire didn't pick up the phone. She didn't reply to texts. She stopped going to the rooftop. Julian sent messages, emails, left voicemails, but nothing. Silence. He thought she was gone for good. Until the fourth day after their fight, a large package arrived at Claire's apartment door. Not flowers, not jewelry, a portfolio, her own photographs, the ones that once hung on his walls, now carefully wrapped and returned. Inside was a handwritten note. "This is your world. I had no right to share it before understanding it. I was wrong. I'm not sorry for loving you, just sorry for trying to prove it the wrong way. If you're willing, give me 1 month. Not to win you back, but to learn how to love you the right way. Jay." Claire read the words 3 times before placing her hand on the portfolio. Something inside her softened. It wasn't the apology, it was the shift in his voice. No more defense, no more justification, just a request to understand. The next day, Julian stood at her doorstep, with nothing in his hands but sincerity in his eyes. 1 month, Claire said, her voice calm. "No social media, no grand gestures, no masks. You'll live in my world, the way I once stepped into yours." Julian nodded. "And the same goes for me. You'll see mine too, truly." And so they began again. Julian took the bus, ate at corner diners, learned how to brew coffee by hand, helped Claire set up outdoor shoots. He noticed how people looked at him differently without the suit, without the last name. Claire visited Julian's office, sat in on his boardroom pitch. She saw him in his own world, confident, composed, but somehow alone. She suggested he shift his perspective, include human stories in his pitch. That insight helped him save a deal on the verge of collapse. Each night they shared simple dinners in her tiny kitchen, telling each other truths they'd kept locked away. Julian spoke of his fear of being used, Claire of feeling like someone's project in past relationships. Gradually, they stopped trying again and began building anew. When their month of rediscovery ended, Claire received the news. She had been selected for a 1-year photojournalism project, documenting life in remote communities impacted by climate change. 4 continents, 12 months, often without reliable internet, not exactly relationship-friendly. She told Julian one quiet afternoon in his mother's garden. There were no grand flower beds, just clusters of lavender and strings of soft lights catching the last of the sunset. "This is everything I've ever dreamed of," Claire said, her voice trembling with both joy and uncertainty. "But it also means we'll be apart for a year." Julian didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands, then back at her. "Then you have to go," he said simply, his voice low. "There's no other choice." Claire felt a lump in her throat. Not because he didn't fight to keep her, but because he loved her enough not to. The night before her flight, Julian didn't show up as planned. No text, no call. She waited, then hurt settled in. The next morning at the airport, as she was about to board, Julian came running. Breathless, disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his hair a mess. In his hand, a small worn box. "Car broke down," he gasped. "Phone died. I walked almost 10 kilometers. Claire laughed through tears. Julian opened the box. Inside was an old compass, weathered with age. "It was my grandfather's, then my father's, now it's yours. Not to give you direction, but as a promise. No matter where you go, I'll always find my way back to you." Claire held him tightly. The year ahead would be long, but this moment, this gift, this truth would carry her through. Because real love doesn't try to hold you back. It lets you fly and promises to meet you where you land. A year apart was never going to be easy. No end-of-day hugs, no sleepy mornings with shared coffee, no eye contact that said more than words ever could. But Claire and Julian discovered something more lasting than presence. A connection built on understanding and the daily choice to hold on. Claire moved constantly, from the snowy mountains of Nepal to the scorched deserts of Namibia to the tiny storm-worn islands of the Pacific. Every place brought new faces, new stories, and new challenges. Lighting, weather, and spotty internet. Though they couldn't speak often, they maintained a simple ritual. Julian would send her a message every day, even when he knew she might not see it for days. Sometimes it was just, "It's freezing in Boston. I miss the way you make hot chocolate. Heard a song today, felt like the light in your photo, from Peru." Someone asked why I stare at sunsets. I didn't know how to explain simply. Claire saved every message, reread them on cold nights in tents, when loneliness crept in like fog. And when she had a signal, she sent back glimpses of her world. I just photographed an old woman with no teeth. Her smile felt like peace. Saw an elderly couple holding hands, silently watching the ocean. I thought of you. No grand declarations, just the small things that held them together even from opposite sides of the world. Julian changed too. Instead of burying himself in boardrooms, he started volunteering for community arts programs, partly inspired by the stories Claire sent. He began funding creative spaces in underserved areas. In an interview, when asked what had changed him most over the year, Julian answered, "I learned to see the world through someone else's lens. And I've never seen it more beautifully." That year wasn't just a test of love. It was a shared path of transformation. They didn't just miss each other. They grew together even while apart. Claire returned on an early spring morning, just as Boston shed the last traces of winter. Julian was already waiting at the airport, in an old coat, no flowers, no signs, just his eyes, the same ones that had waited through late-night emails and morning texts across time zones. When he pulled her into his arms, Claire felt the world fall quiet. The distance, the longing, the growth, they had all led to this. "You're home," she whispered. Julian didn't speak. He just took her hand and led her to a place she hadn't seen before, a small house tucked between two neighborhoods, not his world, not hers. Inside, a sunlit studio for Claire, a quiet workspace for him, and a garden of lavender like the one his mother once loved. "I bought it while you were gone," he said softly, "not to live in, but to begin." Claire stepped forward to hug him, then froze. Julian had dropped to one knee, holding out a silver ring, old and unassuming. Her breath caught, not because of the ring, but because of what it meant. It wasn't new, it wasn't flashy, it was his mother's. "I won't promise it'll always be easy," Julian said. "But if there's one place I call home, it's wherever you are. Will you build this life with me?" Claire didn't need words. She nodded, then fell into his arms. In that little house between two worlds, they began again, not from scratch, but from everything they'd learned about love, about each other, and about themselves. Claire and Julian didn't throw a grand wedding. No castles, no glittering gowns, no 5-course menus. They chose to marry in their own backyard, where the lavender had just begun to bloom, where sunlight slipped through leaves, and where their closest people sat on wooden chairs, wine in hand, smiling through tears. Claire wore a simple white dress, light as air, stitched by her own hands over many quiet nights. Julian wore no tuxedo, just a crisp white shirt and a smile he couldn't hide. They didn't exchange elaborate vows. They simply looked into each other's eyes and spoke from the heart. "I promise not to fix you," Julian said, "only to keep learning how to love you the way you deserve." "I promise not to wish you were someone else," Claire replied, "but to always remind you that you are the kindest man I've ever known." After the ceremony, guests shared homemade cake, sipped wine from paper cups, and danced under string lights like children. No one cared about designer dresses or diamond cuts, but everyone remembered the way they looked at each other, with eyes not just full of love, but full of choice. Through hardship, through distance, through growth. A month later, they opened a free photography class for neighborhood kids. Claire taught them how to see, not just look. Julian worked part-time with a community investment fund, supporting creative and environmental projects. Their life wasn't perfect. There were stressful days and quiet dinners, but they had learned not to run, not to retreat. Their little house grew warmer each day, with Claire's photos lining the staircase and Julian's notes stuck to the fridge. "This morning's light reminded me of the first day I saw you." Their happiness wasn't a peak, it was solid ground, something they walked on together, stumbled on together, stood up from together. One day, when they're both gray-haired and forgetful, they may not remember who said "I love you" first, or how the lavender bloomed that spring, but they will remember how it felt to choose each other, again and again. They'll remember the quiet joy of building a life not out of perfection, but out of presence, of always coming home, not to a place, but to a person. And maybe that's the truest kind of love, the kind that grows not despite distance, but because of it, the kind that waits, listens, forgives, and chooses again and again. Not perfect, but always real.